The Tokyo Olympics wrapped up this past August after being delayed for a year as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. While the games are always exciting and wrought with great stories, it turned out to be very expensive, no fans were allowed to attend, and viewership was generally down. But is there hope for Tokyo to promote a lasting positive legacy for the city?
This is Scott Gann with the Bold Cities Project, highlighting innovations shaping our cities. Today, we'll be talking about how hosting the Olympics is an opportunity for positive or negative impact on the built environment, highlight some examples, and consider what the future holds for Tokyo.
Cities make bids to host the games and are awarded the honor by the International Olympic Committee, or IOC. There's plenty of controversy about the IOC when it comes to finances and transparency. But for the purposes of this video, I'm not going to get into the weeds with that. Let's simply look at it from the perspective of the cities. Billions of dollars are spent in preparation for the Olympics. Tokyo is estimated to have spent around $26 billion for this iteration of the Games. The original estimate was $7 billion, but growing scope, compounded by the pandemic and shortages in supply and labor, caused the large increase. Postponement and added pandemic precautions are projected to have cost the city an additional $2.8 billion. Selling tickets and tourism are the most direct ways cities get a return on investment. So this year, Tokyo really took a hit, missing out on $850 million in ticket sales alone. And while the international broadcasts allow the city and the nation to showcase themselves, the hosts don't see any of the money from advertising revenue.
So how can cities like Tokyo leverage the Olympics for their good?
The games were never meant to be outright profitable for cities, so they can focus on how their investments can serve them far beyond the 2 weeks of competitions and festivities. The biggest way would be to utilize long-term infrastructure improvements for the city, designed for the citizens.
Let's look at a couple examples of missed opportunities and success stories when it comes to leaving a positive Olympic legacy.
Athens. Greece was the birthplace of the Olympics, and the city of Athens hosted the Games in 2004 for the first time since 1896. It was a romantic event that inspired many, but the legacy the Games left was far from stellar. The financial crisis starting in 2008 made maintaining and transforming the giant venues very difficult, contributing to then becoming, quote, white elephants. The term generally refers to stadiums that become neglected since they're too expensive to demolish and too expensive to maintain, so they just sit abandoned. By 2010, half of the structures reached white elephant status, but some, like the main Olympic Stadium, basketball and swimming venues, and the media center, are still in use. Transportation, Olympic Village conversion to public housing, and other general infrastructure improvements have also left a positive footprint. Rio. Rio has been under much scrutiny for their role in hosting the Olympics in 2016, even before they began. Organizers' failure to clean up the waterways as promised, and displacement of more than 70,000 lower-income residents to build venues made them unpopular from the start. Alleged corruption and shady real estate investment deals may have been primary drivers in the location of the investments further away from more populated areas. This limited the long-term effectiveness of the venues as public and event spaces, since they weren't well integrated to the rest of the city. The $950,000 electricity bill for the iconic Maracana Stadium caused the government to shut it down, adding insult to injury because of all the vandalism it had already experienced. The Olympic Village was supposed to become luxury housing, but the 31 towers remain unused. And Rio initially tried to sell the venues to private investors to run and operate them, but there were no bidders at that time. While the city has received much criticism, there are still some bright spots. Maracana Stadium has come under private ownership, and after being cleaned up, has recently hosted events like the Copa America final this past summer. Other silver linings include improvements like new transit lines, museums, parks, and revitalization of some parts of the city. And promises are still in place to convert the facilities and finish what was started, but financial instability has caused a freeze on spending. Munich. Munich may have been the first success story of turning Olympic hosting into a legacy project back in 1972. After almost 50 years, many of the venues have stood the test of time, and the park and Olympic Village turned housing each add value to the city as a whole. The primary site, Olympia Park, has hosted more than 14,000 events since as early as 6 days after the 1972 Games. In 2019 alone, the park had 4.3 million visitors and 417 events. The city owns and operates the facilities that welcome residents and tourists alike. The former Olympic Village became 1,800 apartments that is reported to have become a thriving neighborhood. Munich became a model for London's Olympic Games. I actually traveled there myself back in 2017 with some friends, and we just so happened to walk past a Blink-182 concert being hosted in Olympia Hall that day. London. London is arguably the best and most recent example of leaving a positive legacy post-Olympics. The venues are located in the Stratford neighborhood, which was previously an industrial site and actually had plans for redevelopment before the bid was awarded. So the original design was created with the intention of converting the Olympic spaces to better integrate to the city in the years following the Games.
We shouldn't see the Olympics as that it's not the end, it's the beginning of a process. And we've built up to that, invested heavily in sport and opportunities. Now we've got to take it further and get people involved in it. That's a big challenge.
The London Legacy Development Corporation led these efforts to create a positive legacy for the Games. There are 5 great examples of how they implemented their plan. 1. Temporary structures were disassembled. The building materials were recycled, and those plots became developable for future buildings. 2. The Aquatic Center had a lot of seating for the Games, but the outer shell of seating was easily removed in order to downscale the building properly for its current use as a public facility. 3. The Media Center for the Games was converted into a technology and innovation campus to support future business activity in the area. 4. The Olympic Village, now called East Village, was converted into 2,818 homes, with 1,439 being affordable units. 5. The design of the park was predicated on the idea of overcoming the physical barriers like rail yards and industrial sites to connect previously disconnected neighborhoods. The city invested $18 billion, running over the original budget of $5 billion. Although they ran well over budget, and some feel the growth is occurring too quickly, potentially pricing people out, many argue that the venture was ultimately worth it.
So what does the future hold for Tokyo?
They actually have what's called a legacy plan that outlines how they intend to use the Olympics as a catalyst for sustainable development in the city. The, quote, Urban Planning and Sustainability Commission is charged with holding discussions on specific actions on the creation of university-usable urban spaces, accessibility around the vicinity of Games competition venues, and sustainable Games operations aimed at providing positive Games legacies. Unfortunately, the pandemic hinders their ability to maximize impact immediately after the Olympics. Only time will tell if they are successful in leveraging the Olympics to make the city better.
What are your thoughts? Is it worth it for cities to host the Olympics? What are some ways that cities can make the most of this opportunity to host a high-profile international event? There's plenty more info in the sources I've linked in the description below if you want to learn more about the subject. And like and subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. And thank you.